Welcome to A Change of Heart podcast. I'm your host, Angel Walston. And in this space, we navigate life together. We ask the hard questions like, what is the truth you haven't told? But most importantly, we grow together. And sometimes that leads to a change of heart. Hey everyone, welcome back to A Change of Heart podcast. We are here for episode 3. And listen, all of the feedback that I have gotten from the first 2 episodes has done my heart well. I have laughed at your messages. I've been like, girl, yes, yeah, you too, you get it? I love it. So continue to send me feedback. And if you haven't listened to the first 2 episodes, take a moment and go back and check out Side Effects of Imposter Syndrome and also episode 1, I'm Not Doing Anything. And as always, make sure that you take a moment to share this podcast, share the episode with a girlfriend, and let's go ahead and jump into today's question of the day. And it's a little heavy. It's going to make you think. So the question of the day is, if you were to be honest, what is the hardest part about being your friend? I probably should ask my friends this question. However, I don't know if I want to know the answer. So we're not going to do that right now. But I think the hardest part about being my friend is probably that I tend to withdraw and isolate when I'm dealing with things because I do tend to process things alone, which I'm working on. I'm trying to be better about that. But I do tend to process things alone. I'll share it with them later on. But when I'm going through things, I do have a tendency to kind of withdraw. And I feel like my friends may say that there have been times where they probably felt closer to me than I was to them as a result of me not always being the most vulnerable and sharing about how I feel about things and my emotions and all of that. So I think that would be what they find to be the hardest part about being my friend. I don't know. Friends, if you're listening, feel free to tell me in the nicest way possible. Thank you. So, as you all know, share your response either in the comment section if you're watching this on my YouTube channel, or you can always post it in my Insta stories when I share the question there on Instagram at Angel C. Walston. All right, let's go ahead and jump into today's topic for the day. Are y'all ready for it? Alexa, play. What about your friends? Are they gonna be around? Are they gonna let you down? Yeah. Hey. Too early, too soon, too much, too much. Today we are talking about navigating adult friendships. And the reason why I put an emphasis on adult friendships because as you get older, the dynamics of your friendships change. You have a lot of outside factors that causes change within your relationships that happen as an adult. So maybe your friends from high school or college, now you all are in a space where some of your friends are married, they have kids, they've relocated like out of state, not just out of town. They have new careers that consume a lot of their time. It's all these different factors that impact our relationships and our friendships. So that's why I wanted to specify adult friendships because we're navigating a lot. We got a lot going on, a lot of things that change, and that definitely does impact the dynamic of your relationships. And I wanted to cover this particular topic because I am the girl who always struggled with friendships. I've had a lot of failed relationships. I've had a lot of dynamic changes in friendships. I've had a lot of falling outs when it comes to my friendships. But with that being said, I've also had successful friendships. And I have 3 friendships who I would consider very solid friendships. These 3 friendships, we have been friends for at least 10 plus years, all of us individually. And over those years, we've been through a lot of changes together. We've had conflict, there's been growth, and I wanted to share some of the lessons that has helped me to navigate these friendships as life has happened, as we've went through conflict, as we've had disagreements. And let me give this disclaimer, I do not claim to be the perfect friend, none whatsoever. None. I am deeply flawed. I will always say that. I don't have everything figured out by any means. I am not the perfect friend. I just wanted to share some of the lessons I've learned over the years in maintaining the friendships that I do have that are healthy, that are going well. I wanted to talk about some of those lessons that I've learned, but also the things that I took away from the friendships that have ended. So one of the major lessons that I have learned over the last couple of years is allowing space for communication, versus assumptions. Let me break this down so it makes sense. Whenever we have had friendships, relationships, and we've known that person for several years or for a really long time, we tend to have a sense of familiarity with them. And because we're familiar with them, that tends to lead to assumptions. And so think about it like this: whenever you've spent a lot of time with someone, you tend to pick up on their behavior, what they like, what they don't like, what their triggers are, what they do well, what they don't, what their bad habits are, and overall things that make up who they are. And as a result of that, we tend to make assumptions about how a person will react, how they will respond, how they will behave based off of what we know to be true about them, right? And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's something that you observe the more time that you spend with a person. However, it can become a bad thing when we don't give people the space to evolve. We don't give them the opportunity to change their mind, which is all a part of living, right? As you get older, as you grow, as you mature, sometimes what you believed a year ago, that might change. Sometimes what you believed yesterday might change. And so we don't really give people the opportunity and space to really come into who they were always created to be because we attach what we've always known about them. And I want to stay here in this little space about allowing space for communication versus assumption because, baby, there are layers to this thing, okay? So, one component of allowing space for communication versus assumptions is simply asking questions. One of the things that I've been trying to be more intentional about implementing with my friendships, and I just started doing this year, are asking two questions that my life coach always asks me. And they are, what do you need from me? And how can I support you? Take a deep breath. It's heavy, right? It's like, oh, okay. And asking these questions has really been an eye opener because it has shown me that I don't always know how to answer those questions, but some of my friends don't either. And what that has taught me is that we have to learn how to give language to what we need, and that can be uncomfortable at times, especially for the people who are used to always making sure everyone else is good, making sure that everyone else's needs are met, making sure everyone else is okay. We don't always take the time to think about, what do I need? How do I need to be supported? What do I need from my relationships? What do I need from people? There can be a number of reasons why that can be uncomfortable, why we struggle with that. And for me, my struggle was asking for help. As I stated earlier, I tend to process a lot of things alone because I've made assumptions about how my friends, family, whoever would respond. And so, based off of that, I decided it's just easier to go through it alone. It's easier for me to figure this out right now. Let me have my moment, be in my head, and I'll figure all of this out alone because I can carry the weight, but it's too much for them. Something my life coach, and y'all gonna hear me talk about her a lot because she has helped me to process a lot of my thoughts regarding this. But something she has really been working with me on is that I have a bad habit of choosing for people how they will respond without giving them the opportunity to show me otherwise. And the problem with this mindset is that it also leaves room for people to assume. So if I isolate and if I don't communicate what's going on with me, my friends could be thinking, oh, she acting funny? She real distant. Y'all know how we are as women. We will create a whole scenario in our head because somebody didn't respond to our text message. They didn't answer our phone call. And so now it's like, did I do something to her? Is she mad at me? And we have this whole idea, this whole storyline that is going on about something that really could have been solved if we just would have communicated it. Which brings up another factor to consider with allowing space for communication versus assumptions is that dynamics change within friendships. They change all the time. And especially within adult friendships, listen, all of us are navigating something in life, whether it's working, starting a new job, moving, being a first time mom, having multiple kids, starting a business, getting married, like all of these things. And we have all of these factors that can impact the dynamic of our friendships. And we don't even realize at times how these factors can shift the dynamic of our relationships, especially when the reasons that they've changed are things that we haven't experienced yet. And we can be quick to make an assumption that a person is intentionally ignoring us or they've forgotten about us as they're experiencing this new aspect in their life. And it's none of that sometimes, but they're simply just trying to navigate this new area that they now have to balance. They now have other people to consider. And so they don't have as much time as they did before. There's all of these different factors, but we can be so quick to make assumptions, yet so slow to extend grace or to take the time to discuss it. And we just allow our thoughts to run rampant. And it's important for us to look at and be aware of our insecurities, because some things that people do or don't do that bother you, they're not really problems. And the person is not wrong, but it triggers you for some reason. And not to say that that's not your truth. You're triggered for some reason, but we tend to get upset with people because of a way that they responded or didn't respond that triggered something for us. And we get offended when that was never the person's intent or that was never their heart behind it. But the reality is, you got to deal with your stuff. You have to deal with your insecurities, because dynamic changes are going to happen in adult friendships. It is inevitable, y'all. But understand that a dynamic change doesn't mean the friendship has to end. It's an opportunity for it to evolve. And we can struggle with this at times because we don't like change. Let's call a thing a thing. We don't like change, but change is not always a bad thing. Sometimes it requires you to adjust your expectations within the friendship, which also is not a bad thing. But be open to having a conversation with your friend, because the problem that tends to happen with dynamic changes is that we notice there's a change, we get in our feelings about said change, but we never address it. And there's so many feelings, thoughts, and tension that is just left in the air. And the reason why I share that is because it leaves room for all of these assumptions that don't get talked about, which can lead to miscommunication, misinterpretation of behavior, unnecessary tension, people feeling neglected or misunderstood. And you have expectations that don't end up being met because you never communicated them. And a lot of times, the reason why we have all of these feelings of being neglected or misunderstood is because we have expectations and we get upset when they're not met, but they were expectations that we never communicated. And then we have this tension, this conflict that arises because you feel misunderstood when you never actually communicated what was to be understood. And sometimes, as women, we make the mistake of feeling like, because I would do it this way, you should do it this way. You should support me in the way that I would support you. You should show up for me in the way that I would show up for you, because that's what I would do. But just because the other person wouldn't do it in the way that you would want them to do it, it doesn't make them wrong. And I want us to take a moment to consider this, especially with the idea of allowing space for communication versus assumptions, because what we fail to recognize is that we tend to show up for people, we tend to love people, to care for them and support them in a way that we would want to receive love, that we would want to be cared for, that we would want to be supported, but not, emphasis on the not, but not in the way that they may actually receive it. And so, a great example of this is when you think about the 5 love languages. So, say your love language is receiving gifts and your friend's love language is quality time. Okay. Paint this picture. So your friend, we're gonna call your friend Keisha, okay? So your friend Keisha, she broke up with her little boo thing. And so y'all talk on the phone, you're like, oh my gosh, girl, it's gonna be okay. We gonna get it together, right? You send her some flowers. The little note says, all my single ladies stand up, and you're thinking, nice gesture, right? Okay. Few weeks go by, month goes by, whatever. She calls you, she's having a bad day, she just needs somebody to talk to. Girl, I can't talk right now, but I'm gonna book you a massage for the weekend on me. Go to Massage Envy or wherever you go to get your massages at and relax. Hashtag self-care. Okay. A few more weeks go by. Keisha calls you and she wants to get out of the house. Okay. She got a whole lot on her mind. She just want to take her mind off the breakup, everything that's been going on at work. And she asks you to join her for some retail therapy, because shopping just cures everything, right? Not really, but for the purpose of Keisha, it does. So for whatever reason, and catch this, very much so could be a valid reason, you're not able to go, but you cash app your homegirl Keisha $50 to get her something nice. Get something nice on me, sis. Y'all know how we like to do. So you feel like you have supported Keisha, you have shown up for her, you've been a great friend, right? What ends up happening is the one friend who is receiving all of these gifts, Keisha. Although Keisha is appreciative, that's not what Keisha needed. She really just wanted to spend time with her homegirls. She just wanted to sit down and watch Netflix or Disney Plus. But if you were to ask you, as the friend who gave all those gifts, you would think you were killing it as a friend because your love language is receiving gifts. And therefore, if Keisha did for you what you've been doing for Keisha, you would think Keisha's a great friend. You would feel like she showed up for you. You would feel loved. You would feel cared for. You would be supported because that's your love language. But all Keisha wanted was to spend time with her girls. She just wanted your company. She just wanted your presence there. You didn't have to buy her nothing. You could have saved all this money. And the thing is, a lot of times we make assumptions about what our friends need or like or want from us, but we never even ask them. And I can guarantee you that if Keisha were to tell you as a friend that she feels like you weren't there for her during this time, you would say she's ungrateful. You would say, how dare she? You would bring up everything that you've done for her. But in her eyes, she felt like you weren't there for her because she didn't ask you to do those things. She simply just wanted you to be there. She wanted you to show up physically. She wanted to have time with you. And a lot of times we make assumptions about what our friends need, what they like, or what they want from us, but we never even ask them. We never ask the question, how do you need me to show up for you? How can I support you in this time? What do you need from me? The other side to this, however, is we have to learn how to give language to what we need and be willing to communicate it clearly. This is something that I struggle with. I can't tell you how many times my life coach has asked me what I needed from her, how she could support me, and my response was, I really don't know. But it's important to ask yourself, why? Why don't you know? Why is it difficult or a struggle to communicate how you feel? I do believe that communication is one of the biggest components to a healthy relationship of any kind that you have, whether it's a romantic relationship, a friendship, family. Communication is very instrumental in having healthy relationships, but is also one of the biggest components that we tend to avoid. And we have to look at the why behind that. What are we really avoiding by not expressing our thoughts, our feelings? Is it conflict that we don't like? Is it the tension that we don't want to stir up? We don't want to be disappointed. We don't want to think about the friendship possibly ending if we have this conversation. What is the why? Think about that. I remember having a friendship where there was tension that was never addressed. It was never talked about. Both of us could tell it was there. And when the person finally acknowledged the ways that they hadn't been showing up in our friendship, my initial response was going to be to minimize it and to brush it off and just say, oh, I understand. It's been a lot going on. No big deal. But that wasn't my truth. And when we don't speak our truth, we allow issues to linger and continue to be unresolved for the sake of keeping the peace when it's actually a false sense of peace because you ain't got no peace on the inside because you are constantly wrestling with this issue that you have and that tension. So I decided instead of saying, oh, it's no big deal, my response was, I did feel some type of way. And that was the moment that I realized that I have a really hard time specifying and communicating how I truly feel about a situation. Although it was accurate that I felt some type of way towards her, we got to make it more specific than that. Like, make it plain. What is the type of way, sis? Like, how were you feeling? And a more accurate picture is the way that I felt was hurt. And I was disappointed because of the nature of what our friendship had become. And another question that my life coach always likes to ask is, how does it feel to say that? Ah, hate it here. She always gets me with these questions. But how does it feel to say that? How does it feel to process that and to say that out loud? And honestly, for me, it felt uncomfortable and unnatural because it's easier to give a blanket and vague response versus having to specify, this is how I felt and this is why I felt that way. And the reason why is the truth I hadn't told. For me, it was easier to detach my feelings when I respond with blanket statements and vague responses because I don't want to admit that I was hurt. I don't want to admit that I was disappointed, let down, that I felt like I wanted a friendship more than the other person, rejection, like all of these things. And there was a part of me that felt like admitting that gave power to the person who I felt hurt by, disappointed by, even though it didn't. It actually frees you to acknowledge it and heal from it versus acting unbothered, like nothing hurts you, nothing bothers you, nothing can get to you. These things do hurt. It does. And that's okay. Now, with all of that being said, and thinking about learning how to communicate clearly what you need, be willing to feel that. I think a lot of times we can run from feeling the things that we deem to be negative emotions, but we're human. And in any type of relationship that you have, friendships, romantic relationships, even with family, there's a risk in loving people. There's a risk in getting close to people. And you have to decide what risk is greater, potentially being hurt by someone or never really developing healthy and whole and life giving relationships because you avoid them or you run from them when they get difficult, when things get hard, just so you can protect yourself so that you don't get hurt. But then you end up alone. Now, in thinking about learning how to communicate clearly what you need, think about what does it mean to me for my friends to show up for me? What does support look like to me? What makes me feel loved? What makes me feel cared for? Maybe you don't have the answer for that right now. And maybe when you ask your friends, they don't know either. That's perfectly okay. I remember asking one of my friends this, and she said, yeah, I don't know. Like, I've got nothing to give you right now. That's okay. Give them space to figure it out. Don't put pressure on it. Don't make them feel like you have to give me an answer right now. No, that's perfectly okay because a lot of times we don't know how to answer it. And it's not because we don't want to be loved, we don't want to be supported, we don't want to be cared for. It's because we've never been asked. So we never really had to think about it. We're so used to being that to other people. So we never really took the time to think about what it looks like for us. But it is really powerful and helpful when you're able to give language to what that looks like for you. Because oftentimes we get upset and frustrated with people for not doing things that we don't realize it's what we want or what we need. And so we don't even communicate it to the person. And so they're not doing something that we need, but we don't even know that we need it. And when I was thinking about this for myself, I had to have a conversation with the friend that we were having some issues. I realized that some of the specific things for me when I asked the question, what does support look like to me? What does that mean to me? It was important at a time where I really needed my friends to check on me, ask me, how am I doing? How are you doing spiritually? And that was really important for me at the beginning of this year because, as I mentioned in the I'm Not Doing Anything podcast, there was a point in time where I stepped back from everything. It was a process of me getting out of my own way, figuring out a lot of things. And I needed people to check in with me because I wasn't always okay and I needed to sit in that. I didn't need to brush past it. I needed to actually deal with those things. And what I've learned about myself is that I tend to give off this perception that I'm always okay and I'm not. And I said this in episode 1 as well, that I'm very good at putting on. I'm very good at pretending. And I'm not saying that it is a good thing or a healthy thing by any means. It's a skill. But when you're so used to portraying that image, people start to believe it. And so I had to have a conversation with a friend and say, hey, I need you to check on me because I'm not always okay, even if you think that I am. It's really important for my friendships to be consistent, for them to be dependable. And the biggest thing for me is when I am honest, when I am vulnerable about how I feel regarding a situation, do not dismiss it. Do not be dismissive. There is a song called I Don't Need You by Andy Mineo. Love him. And there's a verse where he says, I need you to listen. When I tell you how I really feel, don't dismiss it or start laughing or act like I'm overreacting. That is me. I was like, yes, Andy. Yes. I need you to acknowledge it because it is difficult for me to have to give language to my feelings at times. So if you are dismissive of it, I'm going to shut down. And I've also had to realize that, yes, I do need my friends to not be dismissive of how I feel when I share those things, but it's also my responsibility to not allow myself to have this knee jerk reaction to always withdraw or to shut down when I don't get the response that I want. So those are some things to kind of help you. But you also have to figure it out for yourself. What does support look like to you? What does that mean for you? The last thing I wanted to talk about in navigating adult friendships is really learning how to deal with fallouts. So, as I mentioned earlier, I have had successful friendships, but I've also had a lot of failed friendships, and I've also had fallouts within my successful friendships. And in looking at the fallouts with the friendships that I currently have, the things that helped me to rekindle those relationships is that I always go back to, what do I know to be true about this person? I am very big about track records. What have you shown me to be true about you? Not about potential, not about what I think you might be. What have you shown me to be true about you already? What has been consistent about their patterns? I try to be very intentional about distinguishing the difference between a pattern, which is something that is consistently an issue, something that is repeated, versus a moment. We all have things that we go through in life. Stuff happens. We're not always the best versions of ourselves. And I do think that it's very important to be willing to extend grace. But you can tell the difference between someone who is having a bad day, a bad week, a bad month versus a pattern. A pattern is a reflection of who you are, the choices that you make consistently. A pattern is a reflection of your character, it's a reflection of who you are. A pattern is consistent. That is who you are. It's what you do. This is who you are, what you are about, versus someone just simply being off or going through something at the moment. I'll be honest, there was a time where I was struggling with a lot of things within my family that I just didn't want to share with some of my close friends. And let me actually take a sidebar for a moment. Something that has helped me in navigating adult friendships is learning that all of my friendships don't have to be the same. And what I mean by that is, I don't have to tell all of my friends all of the same things. I feel like each of them individually serve a purpose in my life. And I have a friend that I am very comfortable with talking about issues within my family or things that are more personal because we have very similar upbringings, backgrounds, all of that. I have other friends that I feel more comfortable talking about things spiritually because we're very like minded and understand that. So they serve different purposes. And when I was able to understand that, I stopped feeling like, oh, these friendships aren't going to work or aren't going to last because I don't want to share certain things. And so I withdraw. But I believe that you can have friendships, they can all have different dynamics, they don't all have to be the same. Going back for my little detour. As I was stating earlier, I was struggling with a lot of things within my family that I didn't want to share with everyone, and some of it was out of embarrassment, pride, feeling like they wouldn't understand. And so as a result of that, I became very distant. There were breakdowns of communications on my end. I withdrew versus telling them what was going on. And my friends extended grace to me during that time, and I'm very appreciative for it because although I've said before, I do tend to withdraw, I do tend to isolate, and some could say that is a pattern of mine. What I will say is that response, however, was very different from my normal isolating pattern because I can isolate and it not be noticeable. I can withdraw and it not be noticeable, but this particular incident was very noticeable. And I'm grateful for the grace that was extended to me during that time because I went MIA for a long time, to be honest. But that was a moment for me. That's not really indicative or a reflection of a pattern to that extent. And when I think about friendships, when we have tension, when we have conflict, when we have issues, I ask those questions. The patterns that I'm noticing, the issues that I have with this person, are they patterns or is it simply just a moment? And I always think about, what do I know about their intentions towards me? When I look back over our friendship, has it been something that I've enjoyed being a part of? Or are we constantly coming back to this same place of conflict or it not working? And what I've realized is that even in your healthiest relationships, you don't always agree with each other about everything. Even in your most like-minded of friendships that you have, y'all are not always going to be on the same page 100% of the time. There will be conflict. You'll get on each other's nerves at times. But at the end of the day, as you build with people, when you get to a place where you love a person and you want them to be a part of your life, you're willing to put in the work to develop that relationship. And that requires communication. That requires you to put in some extra effort to do the work. And something I learned from a falling out with one of my friends that I'm still friends with now was I remember that something happened in my life. I don't remember specifically what it was, but I remember being really excited about it and thinking like, "Oh, I have to tell so and so." And that feeling of excitement completely went away because I realized we're not friends right now. We're not talking. I could text her, but it's awkward because we're not friends. And that was a really sucky feeling. Like, I don't know how else to explain it, but it really hurt me that I had this moment that I was really excited about that I wanted to share with my friend, but I didn't because we weren't friends. We weren't talking. We weren't communicating at that time. And it made me think about this idea of navigating fallouts with friends. If I have a special moment in my life, I want you to think about this. If you have a special moment in your life, whether it's you get a promotion, you get engaged, you get married, you get pregnant, I don't know, you quit your job, you go on this amazing trip, would you feel some type of way? Y'all know to give language to it. But would their absence be felt if they weren't at your wedding, if they weren't at your baby shower, if they weren't a part of this exciting moment? Would it hurt to not be able to call them to say, "Oh my gosh, girl, he put a ring on it"? Like, would you feel some type of way? And what type of way would that make you feel? Would you think, "Man, I wish I could tell so and so about this. I wish Keisha was here." And if so, the next question is it worth reconciling? Is it worth it as I look back over all of these things? Is it worth reconciling? Is it worth having the conversation? Is it worth revisiting? And another thing about navigating fallouts is considering the amount of time that you allow to pass. Because they say time heals all wounds, and I get the sentiment behind it, but time also allows your heart to become hardened. It allows pride to set in. You become less likely to forgive or even to want to reconcile. You will start to create even more reasons why they want a good friend anyways, you know? And the more time that passes, the more distant you become, the less likely you are to have any kind of conversation to try to reconcile or anything of that nature. All of my friendships that I've had fallen outs with, even those that we were able to rebuild our relationship, we were not friends for at least a year or longer. And it all could have been handled by having a conversation the next day after the falling out, within the first 1 to 3 business days. I just think it's really important for you to have that conversation to clear the air sooner rather than later, because the more time that passes, the less likely you are going to be willing to want to work through it or to even take the time to acknowledge what you didn't get right. And honestly, a change of heart that I've had regarding friendships is that cutoff and cancel culture is really unhealthy, y'all. And listen, I was the cutoff queen. I would ghost people in a heartbeat, including my friendships. But it's easy to cut off people. It's easy to end friendships versus talking things out. It takes courage to forgive someone, to have to extend grace, to communicate how you feel, to reconcile, to rebuild. It's not weak to do those things. Even if the person hurt you, can we talk about it very briefly? Even if the person hurts you, it's not weak to forgive them, because sometimes we allow pain and hurt to keep us from reconciling a relationship that we want to. That's not a bad relationship. Things may have been said that shouldn't have been said, things may have been done that shouldn't have been done, but we only are able to see through our lens of hurt, our filter of disappointment. And so we become so guarded that we don't want to move past something that can be moved past. I understand there are things happen that it's like, this is unforgivable, but it's not always like that. And I know with my friendships, I've hurt their feelings, they've hurt mine, But what it always came down to for me was I knew on my end it was never intentional to hurt them. And I truly believe that it was never intentional for them to hurt me. And that's why I was willing to reconcile, because I trusted that they always meant well for me. They always would wish me well in spite of disagreement. Like, I genuinely believe that even if we're not on good terms, that they would still wish me well, even if we were not on speaking terms. And with that being said, it's important to know when to reconcile, but it's also important to know when to accept that a friendship has simply just run its course, because sometimes we will hold on to relationships just because they're familiar, just because I've known you forever. We are loyal to dysfunction sometimes, y'all. We are loyal to things simply because you've always been here. I've known you since I was 5. So we got to be friends forever. But it's an unhealthy relationship. It's imbalanced. It's not good for either of you. And I believe that the encounters and interactions that we have with people, they always serve a purpose. Some people may be a part of your life forever. Some people are lessons. Some people are real hard lessons that we didn't have to learn the hard way, but nonetheless. But I share that to say that sometimes friendships just simply run their course. And it doesn't always have to end in confrontation, bitterness, anger, this brawl. It's not always a negative experience to end a relationship or a friendship. And I had a friendship that ended, and it was literally a conversation that the friendship's run its course. I don't think that we have anything else to give to one another at this point. And as you have these conversations, as these friendships come to an end, be okay with grieving the friendship. We don't always acknowledge that when friendships end, we experience very similar feelings of how we feel when we go through a breakup. And the reason I use the term grieve is because the feeling of a friendship ending is like a death that happened, but the person is still alive, but you can't talk to them. You could, but you won't. And it's so important to take the time to grieve the loss of a friend so that you can really heal, and also so that you don't hold your other friendships or new friendships accountable or responsible for an experience that you had and they had absolutely nothing to do with. Because just like what we do in relationships and romantic relationships, we do the same thing with our friendships, that we tend to hold people to this caliber, or we hold them accountable for how a past friend hurt us when this new friend ain't got nothing to do with it, or even your current friends ain't got nothing to do with it. So as you are transitioning out of a friendship, as you're grieving the loss of a friendship, take a moment to think about, what did you learn from the friendship? Not what they did wrong, but what did you learn? What did you learn about yourself? What are some things that you think you could have done differently? What was the lesson in this? What is a takeaway from the friendship that helps you to grow as a person? And challenge yourself to acknowledge you're wrong. I'm going to say that one more time for the people in the back. Challenge yourself to acknowledge you're wrong. It is very easy to point out what everybody else does wrong, but we play a part at times, and more often than we want to acknowledge. And a part of growing is acknowledging that you ain't always right. I know you want to be, but you're not always right. And sometimes when we get so used to seeing things how we want to see them and feeling like we are right, it can be very challenging to see that just because the other person doesn't see things the way that you do, or they don't do things in the way that you do, that doesn't make them wrong. Even though you feel like you're right, it does not make them wrong. Something I had to acknowledge when I was having a lot of failed friendships is, guess who the common denominator was? It was sis. Sis is me. I am sis. Sis is she, okay? I was the common denominator. Even if I felt like I was right, I'm still the common denominator, so something's wrong. If I'm constantly having failed friendships, if I'm constantly falling out with people, something is wrong there. There is an error somewhere. So what is it? Ask yourself the why and the what questions. Are you drawn to a certain type of person or personality? Do you not take criticism well? Are you judgmental? Are you very critical of people? I can admit that I can be very critical of people at times, and I really have to check myself on that constantly. But ask yourself, okay, if I'm constantly falling out with people, before I point the fingers at what everybody else did wrong, let me just take a moment and step back and look at me. because something's going on here. There's something that's not working. There's something that is an issue. So let me take the time to do a self-examination and look at myself before I point out everything that somebody else did wrong. And don't allow pride to keep you from admitting where you went wrong, because you could potentially end up missing out on really healthy relationships as a result of that, because you're more concerned with being right than having healthy communication, healthy relationships, being willing to reconcile, to forgive. So before you just kick everybody to the curb, before you throw all the friends away, take a moment to do some self reflection. Take a moment to really look within and think about, okay, what can I improve? What can I work on? What is the lesson in this? Because there's always a lesson. All right. I hope that you all were able to take something away from this. I feel like I'll be doing a part 2 maybe next season to dive a little deeper into some topics regarding friendships. But I really hope that you took something away from this, and you already know, share it with your girlfriend, share it with sis, and start the conversation. How can I show up for you? How can I support you? What do you need from me? And ask yourself those questions too, because we need to think about it too. But that's all I have for this week. I hope you all have an amazing week, and we will be back here next Thursday for Thanksgiving, just for a little brief gratitude episode. So make sure you tune in. Have a great week. Thank you so much for tuning into a Change of Heart podcast. I hope that you were encouraged, and please take a moment to share with a girlfriend, and don't forget to download the episode. Last but not least, I would love to connect with you. You can follow me on Instagram at Angel C. Walston and Facebook and YouTube at Angel Walston. Have a great week.